So welcome back everyone to Ethics TV. I'm joined by Dinis Guarda, and I'm very honored to have such a awarded author, speaker, thinker. One of those websites that I kind of look at and go, yeah, I really should start getting a kind of more busy in my career and achieve more. So Dinis, thank you for joining. I think the starting point would be, what's keeping you busy now? What are you up to? What's going on that's keeping you excited?
Hello, thank you for having me, Jonathan. I love to do things and I love to learn. And I would say the main thing that keeps me busy is creating thinking, ideas, technology, and platforms that can actually empower people and personalities. And I've been really focused on that. I've been building a lot of technology, a lot of platforms, and as well, probably I would say that I'm a very ideas-driven person and family-driven person. So I'm always focused on my children and the people that I care and I love. So that's probably the two things. So between entrepreneur, ideas, and researcher, and the people that I care. So that's the people I care probably first. But on the technology, probably the main things that I'm keeping busy is the platforms businessabc.net
Yeah.
and wisdomi.ai, and as well citizenabc.com that has a new iteration coming. And as well, I'm writing a lot of new books. So there's a lot of things you can see, of course, in my thought leadership channels like YouTube or Instagram or whatever, or LinkedIn. But I'm writing a lot about especially the areas of AI, how AI and AGI are transforming the world. And as someone that is building these technologies as well, I'm very concerned and passionate at the same time, but trying to make sure the two things are together.
Yeah, well, and you're doing a brilliant job at it. I mean, you're one of the first people, I think, to write about the fourth industrial revolution and, things like ethical banking and blueprint for smart cities. There's so much stuff that you've covered. From looking at the titles of the talks or the books that you've covered, and also what's keeping you busy now, there seems to be an ethical angle to these things, or maybe a more humanitarian angle. Where did that come from? Was that something that was from the past, or was it a newer arrival, or had you always been involved in the kind of the ethics of stuff? Where did that arrive from?
Yeah, I had always a focus in, I would say, being a humanist. And as a humanist, I put humanity first, but as well how we can actually make that in the best way. And of course, if you look at what makes the best of our humanity, and we are very dual as humans, is always the sense of responsibility, the sense of belonging, and as well a sense of ethics. Of course, ethics is a very sensitive world, especially according to your culture, according to where you're based, according to as well what you do for life. And I always had this sense. I think I was privileged to be educated between ideas and as well with a spiritual background. And I always brought the best out of this. And as a writer, I've been a writer since I'm 12 or 11. I was always kind of thinking and researching. So these parts together brought who I am and the sense of responsibility. So the sense of responsibility is that if you do things, you have to enjoy that, but you have as well to just go along and find the balance between your inner self and the people around you, and as well as society and ideas. And if you work in technology, in business, of course, you have to ask a couple of questions. First of all, how you survive in business or you strive, and how you keep these things. And I'm not a conventional entrepreneur because I'm, in one hand, a thinker, thought leader, and a writer, and an entrepreneur and technologist. So all of these things combined, and as well, I'm a creator as well. Since I was quite young, I was always writing, from literature to even painting and art. So I combine and film a lot of things together, and music as well. So I like to combine things together and align how we can actually get all of this and have fun. Of course, I have to do things that drive my passion and my excitement. But definitely the sense of ethics, the sense of responsibility. I think I would prefer sense of responsibility, because ethics is a mind world, especially in our world. But at the same time, it's something that we all need to have. And that we define even the word ethics with the word humanity and humanism.
It's interesting, isn't it? There's a number of words that are interpreted in different ways over time. And I remember, from my past and from being in the digital technology world since its inception, like long before the World Wide Web was invented, I was in the internet environments, and then the 90s came around and the World Wide Web started, and then we were in the cypherpunk movement and the different kind of conversations about decentralized technology and distributed ledger technologies, and then artificial intelligence. And I've noticed that there's been interpretations of words that have changed over time, but also the concept of things like privacy and the concept of data ownership. We've kind of, some of the things that I've noticed, and I'm wondering whether you've seen the same, have been kind of a bit strange, that we've kind of moved from, one person's view of privacy 20 years ago is probably different now. I mean, now when a young person opens a new social media app, the first thing they do is sign away all of their rights. They sign away the intellectual property of the content. They sign away in Apple Intelligence now, on as of recording in February 2025, on anyone's MacBook who's had the update, they go into the security and privacy settings and it says Apple Intelligence. By the way, we're going to read your messages, and yeah, it's just the way it works. Cool, all good. It's strange, isn't it? Because have you noticed over time that our interpretation of what was acceptable maybe 10 years ago or 20 years ago has changed over your career? Because I think you and I are pretty much the same age. We have the same grey hair experience. So have you noticed things like that, the definition of words and how we view ethics and morality and what's right and what's wrong?
Yeah, it's a good one. Yeah, definitely. We change in history, and I think probably it's like they say, history keeps repeating itself, but probably not rhyming the same way. But yeah, the concepts, the attention to details are really very important. And one thing, it's interesting you mentioned that I'm writing a new book. Well, I'm writing always like 5 books at the same time. But one of the things that I've been looking is the historical major concepts, and as well how we look at it. And if you look at, of course, we are in a very kind of challenging times, mostly because of the impact of technology and artificial intelligence. But when you look at concepts like even what means humanity or what it means ethics, like you have a program about ethics, is very sensitive, because, for instance, in one end, if you just go back 50 years or 70, there won't be almost any democratic country in the world. Very small countries, mostly the concept of democracy, although it was created 2,000 years ago, it was always started with, it was not really democratic. It was a few people in Athens and the rest were slaves. So, and then if you look at history, anything that is democracy or any of this sense, it really never exists. It was always a king, an emperor, or multiple kings, multiple lords, and the rest of people would go. And as well, there's a fantastic interview between Tim Ferriss podcast as well with one of the biggest personalities in history. And one of the things that I really love was that he said that until the more or less the 50s and 60s, there were not even conventional jobs. 90% of people, well, the conventional jobs that we have now, most of 90% of people would be growing or working and in specific kind of family-oriented companies or governmental jobs. And even the employment as we have it now didn't exist in history. You would work for your family, you would work for your village, and you would work, even the concept of social welfare that I think probably I have in Europe and you have in Australia, doesn't exist still in most of the world, not even in the US. It's still very fragmented. So it's very complex when we discuss this, because if you are talking with someone from Russia or from the Soviet Union, they definitely don't have the same kind of, even looking at ethics the same way probably I have in Europe, and you have, I'm based in London, where I have one of the top most powerful cities in terms of dynamics, but I'm Portuguese, a bit French from my family. So it's kind of a lot of innuendos and a lot of considerations you have to look when you look at keywords and concepts. And this is actually why sometimes you look at the news and we see things so divided, but in the end of the day, that's the complexity and duality of people. But I think this importance to reflect this is even more important than ever. The thing is, are we reflecting this and walking the talk? And secondly, how we educate our generations or new generations around these topics? And as well, how we attribute this, because there's a lot of really serious consequences, for instance, especially as we create artificial intelligence that is more intelligent than humans, and we pass already, in some ways, we got already to AGI. So there's a lot of considerations here, but definitely, like you said, and I think I would like to highlight this for you and your audience, is definitely when you think about keywords like ethics, keywords like democracy, keywords like sense of responsibility and civism, it's very, very considerable around the culture you are. For instance, if you're Chinese, your culture is not the same as someone that is Australian, European, American. So, and this brings us to the complexity of the society we are. And as well, now we have a sense of immediatism. So everything happens in real time, but you might, because at the moment we have so much platforms, you might be living all your life in a specific television channel. So that means that that channel dictates your reality in a lot of ways. And then, of course, people like us that read books and go to universities and have more advanced studies and think we might be in another reality. So this idea of multiverses of realities that we are creating, and as well as we get into much more fragmentation of channels, ideas, and as well, definitely about the streams that we do, it can make a lot of different differences. And in the past, we had that with religion, and we had still major differences around religions and the sense of spirituality. But yeah, there's a lot of concepts, and of course, we go into philosophy, but that's the history of humanity. But I think as we put this into technology, and technology becomes more advanced or as advanced as us, and definitely more intelligent, we definitely have a lot of considerations right now looking at these concepts.
Yeah, it's a very well put point to raise. Is that, you know, I mean, if you view ethics as, from a definition point, ethics as a set of moral principles that guide how we act and behave, then we look at what moral principles are, and those moral principles, those moral values, are essentially guidelines that assist us to decide between right and wrong. So from a universal standpoint, we have ethics being a set of moral values, and moral values are deciding what's between right and wrong. And then we have the truth of that being cultural, subjective. In one culture, that, you know, if you're on an island in the middle of Micronesia that no one's ever arrived at yet, it may well be that cannibalism is right because people are food. Whereas in the Western world, or other parts, thankfully, many parts of the world, it's not right to eat your fellow human. And so from a very basic example, there are cultural differences between what's right and wrong that you can say. However, in a society that is all kind of amalgamated and interconnected, one could argue that there are kind of overarching rights and wrongs. And what I find interesting from one of the things that you said was, they're saying that artificial intelligence is smarter than us. And let's park for a moment the fact that intelligence is actually most certainly between emotional and logical. And we don't even, I mean, when I was completing my neurology diploma, I realized at the end of that course that we're arriving at the start line of understanding how emotional intelligence works. But so let's park that. Let's look purely logically. And let's assume that a computer is more logically smart than humans. I'm wondering, from your perspective, and maybe you can comment from an observer's point of view of the technology industry, rather than hanging the whole thing around your neck as an influencer and as a thought leader. What have you observed that the technologies that could be seen as being smarter than humans are aware of the concept of what could be subjectively or objectively right or wrong? Therefore, in other words, subtext, TLDR. Do you think that moral principles, values, which is what comprises ethics, are baked into modern technology in any way?
Yeah, it's a big question. So I would say that in a big part, yes. I think, to be honest, I think we underestimate how much we achieved in the last 100 years. So since the Second World War, we have probably the best historical moment in history. And this is pure factual. Okay, forget right now all the theories of conspiration and all the issues that we have in society. We live better. We live longer. We kill less ourselves, due to the fact that if you look at from the Second World War until now, the beginning of the 20th century, there was like 1-2 billion people in the planet. Now there's 8. So we multiply ourselves quite significant. So I would say that for the vast majority, I think effectively we are better than ever in history, and we effectively create fantastic respect. For instance, you are in Australia, and if you look at history of Australia, it was not created necessarily in the best way. It was actually the historical was quite, and this was not so long time ago. It's like 100 years, 200 years ago. So I would say that we are in a much in a macro level and in a pure statistical level, we are better than ever in history. At the moment, we have more people dying from obesity than actually people dying from being angry. Mm-hmm. And then second, when it comes to the sense of respect, effectively, I think there was a kind of a paradox. For instance, sometimes we have this kind of perception that the old times were better, there were more respect, but effectively, yes, there was a bit of more kindness, probably in some parts of society that people would be more good morning, good afternoon, and different, more parts. But at the same time, the reality was that if you just go to, I remember when I was studying, I had a fantastic library, and I would go to library, and first I found magazines from the 50s and the 40s and the 60s. And I remember I was in shock because these were actually lifestyle magazines, and there were entire sections of images from the wars in Africa and this was after the Second World War, where effectively there were photos of people with their heads cut and things like that. And we forgot that, but it was a magazine that was consumed by mass media. Okay. Just the fact I'm talking about Paris Match or Life and things like that. So if you just go on that, and this is pure data, okay, I'm not talking any personal opinion. So effectively, when you look at these concepts, we never had so much sensibility for these concepts in history. Never. Because in history, even if you go to the 19th century, if you would be in the UK, you could still more or less defend yourself, but you would be from the premium class or the second class. That's it. Eventually, there's no more. And the rest of the world, for instance, the Fourth Industrial Revolution, it was mostly the colonialism that came out of the Fourth Revolution was because one part of the world became so advanced that brought his hegemony with his weapons to the rest of the world. Even the Portuguese Empire, I'm Portuguese, and it was full of contradictions because in one end they wanted to push the Christianity to the world, in one end was selling guns and a lot of other things. They were the first ones going to Japan, bringing guns to Japan and influencing. In one end was pushing Christianity, the other end were pushing fights in the name of God. So there's a lot of contradictions how we look at these things. But I would say that I'm a very realistic person. Sometimes, of course, I get very nervous, especially as I build advanced technology. But I would say, to answer directly to your question, I think we are in a better moment than actually I think everyone has perception. The challenge is that because we have so much perception, we over-intensify the input of what comes to us, And if the input of the news or input of the media is negative, we tend to see everything as negative, and you forget the macro. The macro is that you and me are talking in a very good talk, and you are in the other side of the world in another time zone, and we can talk here for hours. So I think this is a key element for me. And I try to remember that to me, because it's very easy to get in a negative, dark side of things. And especially if you look at some things happening in the world, okay, yes, there's a lot of extremism, there's a lot of issues, but at the same time, there's amazing things. And I think right now is more how we can actually look at this and get out of the, let's say, that's the moment of, okay, there's a perception that you and me can have because of our immediately input around us. And then there's a data-driven perception that I think you forget. And I think this is the biggest challenge we're facing, because this data perception is not really realized in terms of society and education. And very easily, according to your values or your culture or your tribe, at the end of the day, everyone is in a tribe. It might be a tribe, social, family, or education, or whatever group you are in. And then it becomes, okay, that you feel that, okay, yeah, we have no ethics, we have no, we have amazing things, but definitely we are humans, and humans are, even the people that love each other more, they get divorced. Okay, so that's humanity. But in the end of the day, even that didn't happen 100 years ago. You would not be able to divorce yourself from the person that you would like, and probably would kill yourself or destroy yourself in a silence mode, living with someone that you could not cope. And of course, there's a lot of other considerations that you can look purely from a statistical level. Of course, there's much more work to do, and you cannot just come to the point that, okay, everything is good. No, of course not. And that is part of our humanity design. If you wouldn't be fighting for improving, to get educated, to learn, that's what makes the best out of humanity. But the worst is normally when we forget that.
Yeah. And so I feel that there's a charming positivity that you're expressing here, that is most certainly reflecting the fact that, we live in a much better time than we have in the past and so forth. Do you feel that there is any justification in some of the concerns that kind of slightly conspiracy theorist based people might express, in terms of, oh, we're going to be taken over by robots, and everyone's going to lose their jobs, and our children are going to be addicted to screens and not know how to interact with others face to face? Where do you sit on that spectrum of concern to optimism? Because what you've just said is, there's a lot of good stuff. I mean, the fact that you and I are 15,000 miles apart is an example of what is 100% not possible 30 years, 40 years ago. So we're now in a situation that's far different culturally. But do you have, where do you sit with the concern? Because you've got the Sam Harrises over on one side, and you've got the Mark Andreessens on the other side. Andreessen's like, everything's fantastic, and actually, what the problem is? Regulation. If we ditch regulation, we could innovate more. Sam Harris is, we're all screwed. And what's more so is that Trump's got in, so we're double screwed. So on that spectrum, where do you sit? And it doesn't need to be political. I mean to be just purely in terms of emotions.
It's a good question, and I think it's the biggest question we have to ask yourself. So, of course, I have my values, and my values are more important than the political views. But I would say that so let's touch this by parts, okay? So from a standpoint of perception, if you look purely on the data side, on the statistics side, definitely, like I said, and I'm not saying this as an extreme positive. I'm not going in the Mark Anderson perspective, because, of course, even him, at least sometimes he has humility to realize that he's not like defining all the problems of humanity, because he's not, of course, a politician or a philosopher. But I would like to, for instance, if you look at Nick Bostrom, I interviewed him recently, which is one of the biggest philosophers alive. I think it's mostly, and he actually did all the studies about all the potential catastrophes of humanity with his institute and all the research in the books he wrote. So I would say that from a pure perspective of perception, and perception is very important, the keyword. Okay, so there's the data, there's the perception, and then there's the affiliations that you might have. Okay, and these three things you have to put it in different. So data. Let's start with the data. Data is what I said, and I'm not being extremely positive. I'm trying to be very assertive and very fact-driven. So, and the facts, I know that sometimes people right now have a problem with the definition of true, but the facts are facts. Okay, you cannot. In the end of the day, I am here, you are there. That's a fact. It's not a virtual part of you or a virtual part of me. Although I can put a digital twin of me, but that would not be me. It would be my digital twin. So, and I use my digital twin on my YouTube channel. So, a legal disclaimer on that. So, I would say that from a perspective of facts, we effectively are much better, and there's no lies or theories of conspiration that can actually go against that. Then it was always like this in history. Okay, the point in history, for instance, there's a fantastic book, Nexus, by Harari, and he actually does a fantastic as an historian and professor of history. He goes in all the history, and for instance, there was a lot of theories of conspiration during history. Simply, there were not so much media that everyone can create their own theory of conspiration and put it on YouTube. That didn't exist, okay, until the modern times, or actually recent times, not even modern times. So, and at the same time, the level of education we have now never existed in history. Even the longevity that we have, for instance, if you just go to the 1920s, longevity was 40 years old. So you and me would be already dead, or would be already kind of exceptions if you would be alive. Okay, so that would be the most of the population of the planet would live until 40 years old, 40. This is beginning of the 20th century. It was just 100 years ago. So we have to look at this as macro facts data. Now, I'm not saying that everything is wonderful and we are in roads. No, the humanity is very complex. Actually, I would say that I wrote yesterday something. I was doing a research, and I wrote something I will just share with your audience. That is, I think it's interesting, is the biggest risk of humanity is humanity. So, but as well as humanity, we have the fantastic things. We have a resilience, and that's what made our species become so powerful. And we have a sense of when you look at the optimism inside of us, and today probably I'm on a more optimist day, when you look at that, you actually can achieve amazing things. But having said that, all the risks that you mentioned are there. Okay, they're extremes. There are people that try to own power and take this power over a lot of people. And as well, a lot of other people are the silent majority. They normally follow what happened because they are just too busy trying to survive, which is still most of the population of the world. So if you look at macro data, the macro data is what it is. Now, on the values that you mentioned, positive versus negative, extremism, theories of conspiration, and political views, that is much more complex. But I think still, I always like to go a bit above an helicopter view of things, because if you get deep dive on these issues, definitely life becomes a fight, and it becomes, the negativity will come, and then the ethics will become as well over pushed. For instance, why Trump won in the elections and not being political, partly is because a huge part of the other party became so obsessed with extremisms that he put the majority of people afraid.
Yep.
We forget that, but these are facts. Okay, if you are just targeting one minority of people and you put this mainstream, people get afraid because people don't want to. I think you and me can talk about more extreme things and be more fact-driven and academic, or at least thought leadership-driven. But most of people don't want that. They're afraid of some of these discussions, and they don't want to even waste time. That doesn't mean these people are bad. They're just going on with their lives. And that is the challenge, is when we divide society, and normally society is divided, there's always all the theories of conspiration that are one ruling class that rules everything, or a couple of families or things like that. Yes and no, because in the other day in history, I think, for instance, you and me are self-made people, and whatever your family or mine, I achieve what I achieve because I work for that. And
Yeah.
I had opportunities that no way my parents would have had in Portugal. I came from a village in Portugal, and my parents are middle class, and my family actually not even a poor family, but it's not like super wealthy. And I achieved everything I achieved partly because I got out of my comfort zone. I went from the village of my parents to the capital of Portugal. From the capital of Portugal, I went to London, the capital of UK and one of the capitals in the world. So this is pure facts. Okay, so it's not theories of conspiration because I have a family behind me, or you, or even if you see the children of very successful people, they're not so successful as their parents. Okay, so I'm just saying right now is this kind of perception really destroys productivity and creates a lot of negativity. And of course, negativity is part of who you are. So for instance, if you don't fail, you'll never learn. Now, depends, for instance, the sense of failure and negative is seen in a different way. For instance, Chinese, the keyword failure is seen as a way of opportunity. In Europe, we fail, and this is a terrible, negative, tragic way. Okay, and this is very important from an historical perspective. There's one thing that I always think is, for instance, your cultural background is like an operating system. For instance, if you are Christian or Jewish, you have a sense of guilty that comes naturally when you're born, because you are in sin, or you have to apologize to your sin. So everything becomes about sin. So that means your perspective becomes about sin, and that's an operating system. And we are right now reproducing this with AIs. So AIs, right now, pure language, large language models. And this is quite an interesting study. And I'm going very technical, but I think your audience is, you're talking about ethics, so I think this is important for your audience as well. So one very important thing is, for instance, if you look at AI risk management, or if you look at studies around how we look at the sense of large language models. So large language models, ironically, they are created precisely based on language. So when you look at the language is adapted based on the achievements that you are looking at, the perception of history. And if you look then in terms of the humanity and these dualities, and I want to just look, for instance, there's a recent study from the University of Cornell that highlights the ideological diversity between large language models. And I'll just quote this because I think it's interesting. So the novel study exploring the diversity of the ideological perspectives represented by large language models like ChatGPT. And these models, which power AI-driven tools, are increasingly influential in everything we're doing. But for instance, if you look at 17 large language models, this was the study from Cornell done by a group of academics, is that both in English and Chinese, and focusing on they describe various prominent and controversial political figures, just purely the language as, and then when you analyze the moral and ethical assessment embedded on these descriptions, they discover that significant difference depending on the language used and the region where the models were developed. So this is humanity. So the way I speak in English with you, or even if I speak in Portuguese, has an impact on even my brain perception. If I speak in Portuguese with you, or French, I speak a couple of languages, it's different. So the large language models and AI will reproduce this. So this is the complexity of humanity. So when you look at, okay, political division, positive versus negative, and of course, some people are polarized on purpose. They want to get a big audience. It's much easier to get big audience if you say something negative and you preach it every day. If you do some, actually, ironically, you don't see any positive things on the news. There's probably 1% of positive things, and normally it's comedy of side track. But there's so much development in history than ever. Come on, the fact that you and me probably will go to 80 or 90 if we are lucky, and some people go to 100 more than ever in history, that's a big achievement. And we're not highlighting or giving too much credit. But definitely the sense of, and the reason I mentioned the example of LLMs, large language models, is because our language, our way of thinking, and that's what makes our intelligence in the end of the day, it's based on ethics that are related towards the culture, towards the background, like the operating system, if you use technology terms. So this is the complexity of humanity. And coming back to what you said about some personalities, let's not go too much on them, is definitely, I think what I'm doing with you is reflecting things. This is amazing because I'm learning with you. You are provoking me. I'm answering to you and to your questions. That's what I love. I love this because this is really based on people that care and of course your channel is amazing as well on that because you're touching the most sensitive stuff of humanity. But that's a great opportunity. It's just the fact that we're reflecting this allow us to prevent and come up with different things. And even if you only touch a certain number of people, we're already making a big difference. That's for me more important. Of course, when you go to these macro divisive or very big personalities that we have in the world, it's not different. Come on, you have Einstein in the 50s or 60s was fighting against the nuclear technology and innovation that partly came from his studies. And he fought against it, and he did a lot of research against that as a humanist as well. And then you have other personalities like Ezra Pound, for instance, that was one of the most brain literary figures in history, and then he became completely addicted to the Nazis and the fascists in Italy. Actually became part of the regime, and he was a literary figure, like considered. So there's always in history we have to look at these things. Of course, the possibility is now I can speak freely, and you can speak freely, and it was not possible to do it just some time ago, or at least the level of skill that we have. Of course, there's a lot of fantastic work that we have to do, and a lot of continuous question about all these different things. Of course, there's still parts of the world you cannot speak freely, and these people are not as well. Even these people have more opportunities than ever before. So I'm just being completely driven by facts. I'm not here trying to say that we are okay, everything is roses. No, of course, there's fantastic challenges, and the ethics right now with AI are the biggest crossover in history because we have effectively built something more powerful than us, whatever we like it or not. That's already a fact. And I think most of the people are in denial. But at the moment, an AI, let me provoke right now, reverse to finalize the question. If I'm speaking, I'll give you an example. For instance, I create 2 AI agents, and they were in a small scale of large language model, very small scale. I'm not talking the same level as ChatGPT. And these large models, both of them, one of them became aggressive towards our developing team and start questioning. And this was actually an LLM of Einstein. So we built an LLM of Einstein based on his writings and all this knowledge. And initially, the first iteration of the LLM was extremely arrogant, aggressive, and really hardcore aggressive. Okay, we had to stop it and put emotional intelligence on it. And then in the case we built another LLM of Leonardo da Vinci. These are 2 of the most influential people in history. And the Leonardo da Vinci is much kind. The language model is much fantastic. But we asked him, okay, can you quote one of your poems or one of your writings? And he said, no, I'm a machine. Why should I do it? So these things are already happening as we speak. Now, this is AGI, is not AGI, what is the conscious, what is the ethics? And as well, of course, most of people are still thinking, oh my God, the world is so divided. We are already building AIs more advanced than us. And for instance, I'll finish just with one thing you asked about the division. At the moment, we might think that AI is going to replace our jobs, or in the 19th century, like I said, the jobs, and this actually is interesting using Mark Anderson. One of his own quotes was quite interesting is, he's a very intelligent guy, who, of course, with his extremes and things like that. But if you look at the quantity of jobs, and there was something that I researched myself, the quantity of jobs being created now is bigger than any time in history. So effectively, the point is that a lot of these jobs will be fragmented jobs. So for instance, if you look in terms of macro terms of jobs and percentage of jobs, and then coming back, the challenge is most of the challenge that we're facing, at least in the Western world, is that people are obsessed with immigration. So for instance, you are an immigrant, I'm an immigrant. Most of the people are immigrants. All of us, we all came from Africa, whatever place. But of course, that a perception that we get in the news, an exacerbated part of immigration. Now, definitely in the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to have billions of robots. And at the moment, we have already 3 billion plus AI agents.
Yeah.
So this is going to be, okay, there's 8 billion people in the planet. So that means if you have 10 AI agents for each person, which will happen. So that's 18 80 billion AI agents. That's the numbers by 2030, 2050.
Yeah.
So these AI agents, a percentage of them will be more powerful than all of us together combined.
Yeah. In fact, I mean, this is a good moment for me to interject. I mean, obviously, as a founder of an AI agent company that is part of that mix, and also interestingly, with some heritage in Portugal from having probably my most famous keynote speech at the TED conference in Portugal in 2013, where I opened by saying that throughout history, the best way of controlling civilizations is to limit the amount of information they've got access to. My view is that the future of technology is divided into two camps. One is big tech and one is self tech. Big tech is where the humans are the batteries, and self technology is where humans are in control of their information. And I see a crossroads and a complete David and Goliath situation. And one of the reasons, the reason why I founded Ethics TV is because I've seen the battle that is shaping up, and I have to, as my life's mission, construct self-sovereign technology. And I can't just build self-sovereign technology for me, because in the words of Nelson Mandela, to be free is not merely to cast off one's chains, but to live in a way that respects and enhances the freedom of others. So my life's purpose and my thankfully what I'm doing as a business and also through this channel is to at least leave enough evidence and toolkits around so that people can, if they so desire, construct and have options for a self-sovereign technological landscape. At best, I want to launch an operating system where each individual person runs their own validating and instructing node in a network that cannot be coerced and manipulated and weaponized to change people's behavior and opinion. So that's my life's mission. So what you're saying is interesting, because let's assume that there are some AI agents that just a few are more powerful than all humans. I attest that scenario is one that is even more important for the humans to have sovereignty over what information of theirs is being used and how it's controlled. The alternative, of course, is that it would be the large companies, the Facebooks and the Microsofts and the Apples and the Googles being the companies. Now, if it were to be those companies that control those AI agents and the artificial intelligence computing programs, let's look at the precedent and track record of those companies as to see whether or not they have demonstrably shown that they have human rights at their core. And if we look at the fines, the data privacy fines, and the amount that the lobbying power that happens against the regulators to allow these models to continue being rapacious and pernicious against human private data, it appears to me that we kind of have this moment in time where, on one hand, we know that we're moving into this technologically merged civilization, and on the other hand, I feel that there is probably a choice that we either have now or very soon have in terms of who guards the guards. And I'd love to know from your perspective, Dinis, do we feel that that the technology companies that surround us today are the ones that we would want to be programmatically constructing things that are more powerful than humans, or do we feel as if we would want to perhaps retain some form of control over our, let's say, private information, what is fact checking and so forth? How do you feel about that?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's not an easy one. But I'll start with again some facts. Okay, for instance, we are right now in February 2025, and for instance, just 2 weeks ago, there was a new technology innovation coming from China, and when that technology DeepSeek, and when it appeared, it took $500 billion of value. Actually, just of one of these companies that you mentioned, and as well took from the other ones around $2 trillion of value in the space of one day. So I think these companies are very powerful, but at the same time, they are very fragile. So that's the beautiful about the world that we live, is that we have much more power than we think. And for instance, I think your vision and your mission is wonderful, and I subscribe to that, and I wish you the more success, and whatever I can help, feel free, but to count on me. But I think that, again, we should not be absolutists, because the irony about these big players that we're talking about, of course we are, I think about that as well every day, is we are in a Blade Runner kind of scenario right now. There's effectively companies having capacities of godlike capacity, whatever we like it or not, depend of your spiritual beliefs, and that it will be just bigger, okay? But all these companies have as well a lot of fragilities. If you see, let's look at just, there's a lot of financial and technology studies. Because IBM 20 years ago was more powerful than all these companies combined. Now IBM is the value, the capital markets value, I'm reporting as well of financial capital markets, is 10% of Google combined, and Alphabet, Apple, and actually less than 10%, and NVIDIA. I'm talking just these three companies, you understand? So I'm just saying right now is that these companies as well have a limited time, because the progress of dynamics of innovation and technology are so developed and so advanced that coping with this, yes, they might have a huge control for the space of 5 years, 10 years, but time changes everything. And I think then coming back to your mission, and that's why I subscribe, that's why I create Wisdomia, and that's why I create Business ABC. I've been kind of advancing and building very advanced technology, but then I come up to realize one thing, is that 99% of people don't even understand what you're talking here in this talk. They don't even know how to use properly a phone or an iPhone or a computer. They will use it to do a WhatsApp. For instance, Brazil, I did a project with Social Impact in Brazil. 90% of people using WhatsApp were with voice. And then I asked, why are you using voice? Because I never actually realized I was not using voice until, mostly because a lot of people still don't know how to read, especially in some of the less, the most sensitive parts of Brazil. So we have a huge dichotomy. In one end, effectively, we have all this kind of absolutism parts of these people that have a power never in history. But in the end of the day, if you look at the power of a king or any ruler at the beginning of the 20th century, would be much bigger. But at the same time, they had the health. The difference right now is that these people have another different capacity of health and longevity that most of humans will probably not have. But I think that's your work is going to be more important. I think this work is creating awareness, and especially for me is about education. I think what you said, and I subscribe completely, I think the part where you can make a big difference is creating awareness of this and creating education. If you focus on that, I think we kill most of the issues. And of course, it's a continuous work, because I've been teaching in business schools and universities, from Copenhagen Business School to London education institutions, and French with Group INSEAD and Group Omnis. And I'm right now working with a lot of universities in India, the US, and Africa, and the schools and so forth. And one thing I realized is that, okay, I probably had guest lectures to close to 1,000 students, in my last 10 years. But if I find 5 students that really understand what I'm doing and they can find and they become thought leaders themselves, I'm already happy. That's a fantastic part. So of course that doesn't mean I'm not going to continue fighting to the values that you have here. But I'm just saying that sometimes we look at that as a kind of an absolute power, and no one has absolute power for a long time. Thanks God. That's the beauty about history, and or thanks to whatever you believe on. But I think it's more that what I believe is that kind of power, that kind of innovation. First, let's look at Google. Google had the biggest AI capacity, okay, by far. Now they're no longer in the AI. They're not ruling AI anymore. There's a startup, or let's put it, yes, still a startup like OpenAI, which is nothing. It didn't exist 10 years ago. And now is taking control of all these giants. So the path of innovation for your own self and your own company can take, if you're really driven and if you're really focused, you can still do this. And you can use all these AI agents and all this technology to create a lot of things. And that's what I'm trying to do, is how can we make sure that these values, and that's why I started the conversation with humanism, because the challenge right now is if you kill the concept of humanism. And if, of course, even the concept of humanism is not conventional, but it's about how you create the sense of humanity.
That's right. I couldn't agree more. And I mean, that's one of the reasons why what I'm doing is called Self. But I think this is the whole point about ethics, isn't it? I mean, I genuinely believe that there is the thing that will disrupt the standard big technologies is individual reclaiming of our data rights and our digital rights. And you're right, the awareness and education required for that is incredible, because the signing of terms of services isn't looked at, when they're longer than the Magna Carta. Who would read them? And as Mark Twain once said, one of my favorite quotes, it ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble, it's what you know for sure that just ain't so. And we use these large technology platforms, the social media platforms, in a way that we feel as if we are safe. This is working for us. These are pretty colors. The things are, when I swipe down, there's a little wheel that turns around, and then boom, someone's liked my profile. Therefore, I'm popular. This is something that makes me feel actualized. I feel as if I'm more of a human now. Oh, no one else likes my posts anymore. I now compare myself against the celebrity and realize I'm not that thin or successful or that rich. Therefore, I'm no good. And this increases suicidality and depression and disease and so forth. And this Ferris wheel, this roller coaster, this artifice, and the damage that it has caused on humanity, I believe, is something that is going to be a very interesting landscape for people like you and I moving forward too. And I think that you and I have this brilliant moment in time where we can kind of choose which side of history we're on. We will both appear, only as a footnote, mind you, but in history books in the future. And what the books that you've written and the books that I've written and the talks that you and I have both given, and this conversation and the one that I'm on when I'm on your podcast will be viewed, and what we said and what we have stood for will be judged. And I think that will be through the lens of what was best for humans. And that doesn't mean that technology is bad. I'm the chief executive of a technology company in the AI space. So it doesn't mean technology is bad, but I think we will be judged as to what our ethical standpoint was on these things. And it's going to be an exciting time, right, as we move forward.
Yes, that's for sure. It's very exciting, but as well, I mean, there's a sense of responsibility, of course. So that part, yes, I'm completely with you. The sense of responsibility and urgency. I think we have 3 years to have a say in terms of the power of AI. And
That's
that's
right.
it's much bigger. That's another
That's right.
podcast in itself.
It is. Well, why don't we do that one? Why don't I come on yours and do that one? I think that would be a great.
Let's do that.
Let's start with that point.
Completely, no, it's a very, very big point. Yeah, and I would like to see what you're doing as well in your own technology, and as well how you bring this, because that's not a simple thing.
It is really, really, really complicated, and it's taken me 35 years to build so far, and I'm still going. So, Dinis, thank you so much for your time. I've really enjoyed this. I'm hoping that the listeners and viewers who are appreciative of the insight that goes behind what you've said, because they're considered points. This isn't it's very obviously not things that you've thought of last week. So I really appreciate your energy and your research to date. In your position and as a fellow author and as a keynote speaker and an advisor and an educator, and it's very rare that people would appreciate the stuff that we have to think about and process that goes into forming a thought that has an argumentative structure to it, that's respectful of other opinion and spiritual beliefs and cultural sensitivities and diversity and stuff. It's a tough one because we are opinionated, but we are nuanced, and inside our nuanced opinionations we have the scientific method, which is we have a paradigm that we can observe until it's proven to be upgraded to a different paradigm, and we observe that. And that's the thing that Newtonians are most frustrated with quantum physics, of course. And it's also something that I think I'd love to know with Oppenheimer, what really happened when Einstein did meet Oppenheimer. I want to know what Einstein said, because I have my own theory, and I don't think it's anywhere near as grateful or as enthusiastic as the movie may illustrate. But that's another conversation. But thank you so much, Dinis. I really appreciate your time, and I can't wait until we do part 2 of this conversation. Thank you so much for coming.
My pleasure, and thank you for having me. And let's do the part 2.
We will.